I think I'm going to just thank the organizers for inviting me. I've never spoken in a church before, so this is a privilege. And of course, I'm not South African, so it's again a privilege to be in South Africa and talk a little bit about what we're doing in Lagos, Nigeria. And so I'm going to tell you about my organization and what we do, and also about why creativity and imagination matters, especially when making change. I'm going to give some examples of work that we've done and then also summarize with what we've learned. So LUDI are an organization that brings together like-minded organizations and people together to advocate for a more inclusive, livable, and sustainable Lagos. And we do this through collaboration, research, and dialogue. So I think that was just a lot of long words that we're like, what does that mean? What does that, who are we? What do we do? So I describe us as a bridge organization. We are the in-betweeners. So we're in between the grassroots people that's living and working in the city and the government. And we try to bring what they want and take it to the government to say, this is what the people want and this is why we need change. So we normally are government-facing, and we're obviously advocating for change and trying to get the voices from those who are most affected to be heard. We also make a conscious effort to bring together a diverse group of partners, from researchers to artists to protesters to environmentalists and so on. And I think it's very important that we do this because this is where creativity can happen. When you really bring a really diverse group of people to deal with very complex problems. Because if you're thinking about cities and urban change or interventions, you're not just thinking about homelessness, you're thinking about food security, you're thinking about housing, you're thinking about mobility, how do they get to work? How do we move them from having no income to having some income? So there's economic development there. So these are really complex issues, and the only way we can really deal with it, or we have found to be able to deal with it, is to bring different partners together. And so we try not to think in silos, because as I mentioned, these problems are not one solution or one problem. The problem is huge and complex. So I wanted to also say that I'm not the only person at LUDI. We have a team of four of us. But to be honest, this is not LUDI. LUDI is so much more than this. I mean, we work with so many different people, as I mentioned earlier. And so the role of creativity and imagination in change making, we don't purposefully try to be creative or imaginative, as I mentioned. We really try to, when we bring people together, we find that we are creative because we're all coming from different parts of life, but also different parts of expertise. And when I say expertise, it doesn't mean that I'm talking about those who have studied environmental protection or something. I'm also talking about those who live it. So those people who are in the communities who are dealing with a certain issue. And they have a certain expertise that those who are in the government or those who are experts don't actually have because they're not there on the ground. It's also very important, as I mentioned, for creativity and imagination to kind of find solutions for complex problems. And by bringing different groups together, you don't just create something innovative, but you also build ownership. And building ownership is also, I mean, we've mentioned this in some of the workshops as well. Building ownership is so important because those who are affected by these issues, if they don't own the solution, they're not going to accept it. So I think we heard from someone about a toilet, and they put the toilet into the community, and then it ended up being vandalized, because they actually had no idea why this toilet was here. They didn't know about it before. It just came into the community, and they're like, this is not ours. I think someone also mentioned about a public space that was in a community, and the fact is that they just ended up graffitiing all over it. So the point is that if we can have these conversations at the beginning rather than at the end, we can have buy-in, as well as long-lasting solutions. And then imagination is key because it allows us and those who have no other option to see a different future. So I want to give an example of a group that we work with called the Girls Bike Club. So we started it because we wanted to train people to cycle, especially young girls. We found out that when we go to all these policy talks, all we have in the room, first of all, is men. We have no women talking about sustainable mobility. Second thing is that when we now went to the community, we also had just community leaders who were all men. So we then met some girls and asked them, do you cycle? Why don't you cycle? Do you care about this? Why, what's going on? And they said to us, the reason we don't cycle is because no one ever taught us. So we started this bike club for these young girls. And it's not just, I mean, the bike club is obviously to train them to cycle, yes. But it also, we're trying to empower them to increase the loudness of their voice, to talk about their issues in the community. And so during the bike club, we do more things than just cycle. And when we ask these girls to think about what do you not like in your community, like we did out today, we went out and asked them these questions. What do you like? What don't you like? Which areas do you feel safe in? Which areas do you not feel safe in? And a lot of them were just like, I don't know what to say. They didn't really know where to engage in this conversation. And so we really had to break it down to them to things like, do you get harassed in your community? Do you feel safe here? How do you get to school? What are the streets where you feel you don't feel like you are safe in these streets? And once we got them to start talking, they actually opened up and said, oh, actually, I really like this street because I can play in this street. Or, I really like this street because I don't get harassed in the street. When I walk in this street, there are people catcalling me and so on. And so this allowed us to take their musings and their conversations and work with designers to recreate what they would have liked to see in the city. And this idea of imagination and showing this to them started to get them more creative and started to think about, okay, what can we see different about the city? So I'm just going to give a couple of examples of the work that we've done, and some are temporary and some are permanent, but it just highlights issues, and we've highlighted issues and advocate for change through these projects. So again, I'm going to talk about open streets, Health Day, and the Girl Bike Club. And with these 3 projects, we worked in one community. It's a low-income community, and we really tried to repurpose street space and public space for community activities. So this is just an example of the street day where we took over a street. I think in South Africa you have open streets in Cape Town and so on. So it's kind of very similar, but this was really community focused, and it was not a long street, short street, where we really put games, and we just closed the street off, did some cycling, and showed what the street space could be, rather than just a space for harassment, which was a lot of things that the girls were saying. And this actually really brought a lot of the community guys together, and so we could share with them what the girls were feeling. So it allowed us to really bring lots of different groups together and talk about how we can change how these girls are feeling within the street space. So this is the Health Day. It's just some picture collages of stuff that we've done. And the reason we did a Health Day was because we had to meet the people at their need. So they all said they needed, blood pressure checks, and different kind of health-based things for themselves. But of course, what we're trying to do is also try to see how we can do this in a public space, because we are trying to rethink what public space can be and how they can use public space. And so we met them at their need to show them something different. And then, of course, this is the Girl Bike Club that I spoke about. So we had kind of self-defense training during the Girl Bike Club. We gave them certificates afterwards, because you always want to feel, once you've done something, you always want to feel like, I've achieved something with this. So we gave them certificates, and they did, this bike club has actually become something bigger than what we had gone there to do. They've kind of created a community space now. They're taking it to schools, and also the girls themselves are championing the project. So it's something that we have passed on to a community group, and they've taken it on, and they're really working with the community girls to foster empowerment, and also learn how to cycle. And cycling became a way for us to engage, because cycling gives you the freedom to move. So, if you don't have money for transport, or you have to walk to school every day, this allowed these girls to feel like a sense of safety, but a sense of mobility. Another project that I'll talk about is the gender perspective. So we worked with 5 architects and student designers to redesign public space with a female lens. We've exhibited this project at the World Urban Forum. We've exhibited it in Lagos, Nigeria for creatives, and then we've also exhibited it in government offices. And the most recent one was actually at the Ministry of Works. And you think, oh, what does Ministry of Works have to do with female perspective in urban planning? But it's completely important because they're the ones that build our roads, our bus stops, these spaces that are, to me, public spaces. And of course, it's not just men that use these spaces, women use these spaces. And women need to feel safe and secure in these spaces as well. And just to say that the Ministry of Works have really, by exhibiting, they're just artwork and designs from different people, and we put it up in their office. And for the fact that we put it up in their office, we had a lot of feedback, a lot of questions, a lot of conversation. And if we hadn't put it in their office, we're still just going to them, talking to them about changing policy, or we're going to them talking about how do we make change. But by putting this in their face, they actually have to act and do something different and engage in that conversation. So this is just an example of one of the projects by a designer called Eve, and it's called Sonder Aware, and this is the public space that she redesigned. And just to say that, if you can see, Sonder Aware is the privilege of having accessibility to gather data of one's environment. So if we look at who gathers data in cities, it's normally city officials. But this is really about how do people gather data and how do they contribute to what the city looks like. And inclusive, of course, is a conversation between all the different partners or different governance bodies and the community. So she looked at lighting, trees, visibility, sidewalk, parking, and she gave the project a rating. And then she put that onto the map and said, these are all the safe spaces and these are all the dangerous spaces. And this becomes very easy for a community member to understand. These are the spaces that I feel safe, and these are the spaces that I shouldn't go in. And they are the ones that collected the data. And then what the plan is to then translate this into community inclusiveness. So the idea is to create an app, and the app, and I'm going to say a little bit about technology after this, but the app basically collects, you can put in the data yourself, so we can give everybody here can download the app. When you get to a street you don't feel safe in, you press I don't feel safe in the street. When you get to a street you feel safe in, you press I feel safe. And so everybody can know already before they go on their journey which streets they should take, which streets they should not. This data can also be shared with government officials to say, these are the spaces where you need to work harder on, in putting street lighting, in making sure that these spaces are safe for everybody. And my point about technology is that, does everybody have a phone that can actually download an app? And so when we went to community women to say, hey, what do you like about this product? Do you like it? Do you not like it? And they actually said, yeah, we would use it, but I think what would make it easier to use if there was someone who collected the data that we give, and we give it on a WhatsApp platform rather than on an app. And I think these conversations going back and forth with the people who will use it and are impacted, as well as the experts, as we call the people sitting in offices and doing the design work, those conversations need to be ongoing and not just one way. And so this is just kind of showing it a little bit more about which streets are safe, which streets are not. And this is it mapped out. And again, the idea of it is that you can then use this data for the ladies and the men who use this space to design the space and say what's missing and what's not. And then the last two projects I'll talk about is the Lagos Linear Park and the Allotment Garden project. So these projects are let's say they're just sitting on someone's desk right now in the government office, which is sad because they have so much potential. But I mean, we talked about this in the public space workshop. How do we make sure that it gets implemented, and how do we make sure that we can push government to act? So the Allotment Garden project, I spoke about it also earlier, which is really, as I called it, a dead space, but I've been told not to call it a dead space. But it literally is a space where no one uses, and it becomes a very violent space. You have drug dealers that end up taking up that space. You have gangs that end up taking up that space. So these quotes were from people who live in the community, and they're saying, for me, quite shocking things. I use the gun to protect myself at any time there's occult violence in this area. When trouble became intense, I had to buy a gun to protect myself. And I bought the gun from a student for 30,000 naira. I don't know how much that is in dollars. not a lot. But I mean, it's very worrying, these statements. The suspect leader of the IA confraternity, that's the fraternity, popularly known as Obasanjo, was weakened and shot dead by a member of rival cult group. Two other persons of them, one was a nursing mother who was also shot dead. And I say these things because I not to shock you or to make you feel like sad or anything like that, but I say these things because these are the realities for these people. Every day, this is their reality. And I use these in presentations because when you're talking to government officials, the only way they will listen is if you show them the reality, that this is what's happening on the ground. And not about climate change or, I mean, these things are important, don't get me wrong, but this is, these are your constituents and this is what they're suffering right now. And so this is what we propose as a solution, which is the allotment garden. Of course, it has lots of different benefits, such as biodiversity, access to food, urban greenery, air pollution, and education. And we didn't do this from an NGO coming into the community. Actually, we worked with the youth in the community, and they came to us saying, we want to do this in our community. Can you make it look flashy so that we can present it to funders, to the government, to say this is what we want to do? And they want to change this space, which is currently a kind of dead space, to something that is alive and thriving. And of course, an allotment garden is a shared space in urban or suburban or rural areas where individuals gather together as an association to grow trees, vegetables, flowers, and engage in recreational activities collectively. And so this is the design of the space. It has a variety of plots, and it has already like water drainage at the back, and there's a recreational area as well. And this is also a view. So I mean, which is why I say like we're the in-betweeners. So someone in the community has said, look, this is what we want to do, and we have tried to make it sellable to those who should listen, but are not listening to them, but will listen to us. And then the linear park. So this is a very big project. We actually work with the same community group for the previous project. And it's a 9-kilometer park, and it looks at the wetlands. And so we're really, again, trying to just find solutions for communities within this area. And we're looking at, and of course this deals with like climate change because we're looking at preservation of the wetlands. We're looking at connecting neighborhoods and mobility. We'll also have a farming initiative that goes on here, so it's also looking at income opportunities. And it does increase safety and security within all these communities in this area. And these are all just some nice glossy pictures that I just want to share with you. So. But then I wanted to just put in here the stakeholders so that you can see that these connections with each like the different stakeholders are so important. But these are all ministerial stakeholders and private sector. And actually, all the work that we did with community people. So they're our largest stakeholder, but actually they have the least power, and all these guys have the most power. And so as I keep saying, we are that kind of bridge between the people who don't necessarily have a voice to those that do have a voice, and those that can make decisions on what happens in the city. So what have we learned with all these projects and groups that we've worked with? That one person can start a ripple. We're talking about changemakers, we're talking about activists, and yeah, one person can start a ripple, but actually we need more than just one person to really finish off. And there are people that we can join forces with. We have strength in numbers. And creating partnerships and collaboration has been the way that we have been able to change the way government does certain things and change the way communities also think about certain things. Imagination is so important because it's the first step to reality. So without your idea or your thinking of another way, then there's nothing to say. So we have to kind of create creative spaces for imagination to happen. Then people also need to see it to believe it. And this is unfortunate because, I can say, you know what, we can create an urban farm here, and we're going to create this amount of food, and we can feed this community, and that's all nice for me to say it, but if you have never seen it before, you won't believe it. And so the next point about case studies and developing and being able to experiment is very important. And we found that this is the only way that we've been able to really change people's way of thinking as well. And then building on data and evidence. I know I don't want to be a lecturer and I'm not an academic, but data and evidence is very important because a lot of these projects actually need a lot of money. And maybe not even a lot, they need some money at least, even if not a lot of money. And to be able to convince people to buy into that, you need data and you need evidence. And the thing is also that you can collect data so easily. Just going out today and speaking to people, you're collecting data. But we may not see it as data coming from kind of an activist perspective. But actually it is, and it's something that is powerful and it can be used. And also building trust. So I think Mark mentioned that he doesn't like to, he likes to be liked, all right? And that's very important actually, because if you can't build trust, then no one's gonna actually follow you. And I'm saying no one's gonna follow you, but that's not just from the grassroots, but also from the government officials and so on. And so you have to find how to leverage all these different people and how to make them, we have to find out how to make them trust us and believe in what we're doing for them to let us do what we want to do and execute projects. And the last thing is to say, do not be discouraged and keep banging on doors and writing petitions and shouting, basically. There was a conversation I had with national government staff who came to kind of do some auditing of NGOs and CSOs. And they even said to us, don't give up. You need to keep banging on those doors. And that was surprising for me because I think they'd be like, yeah, shut it down. Like, what are you trying to do? You can't make change. But they said, don't give up. You need to keep banging on their doors. You need to make them see change. Because if you don't, then, nothing happens. And so the last quote is, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And as an someone that does advocacy and I would say activism, I don't think I'm an activist. I'm not that angry yet. but I think this is really important because if we are silent about things that matter, then nothing changes. And unfortunately, in this world that we live in, there's so much negativity and issues happening constantly. And it seems like the people in this room care. So we can't be silent. We must make some noise and talk about things that matter. Thank you.